We are back on Morning Line. Listen, it's our final segment this morning talking about coping with stress and depression and the situations around us, not just for the holidays, but what's happening in Chattanooga with that fatal bus crash. Dr. Karen Ray's with us this morning. She's from over at Centerstone and the Chief Medical Officer. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
This is, I know, a busy time for all of you. I'm wondering, as we sit here, and we can take more calls if you'd like, but all right, if someone's watching us right now, and let's assume maybe there's some there that are doing fine themselves, but they know of someone that's going through a difficult time. Can you give them just some ideas on maybe how to broach the subject or try to help their friend or loved one through this? How would you do it? Okay, if I was sitting here just bummed and we're good friends and you picked up on it, but how do you go about addressing it, especially when you can tell I'm not really wanting to talk about it? I feel bad. I just want to be left alone. What do you do?
Well, I think first it's that effort to connect.
So you have to find a common ground?
Well, you just have to...
Let's go get a bite to eat? What?
Sure. Let's go get a bite to eat. What are you doing? Can I help you? If you need to put up the Christmas tree and it's daunting, can I come help you? So it's making that personal connection. And then eventually it's saying, I've observed that you aren't feeling as well as usual. Do you think that's true, or am I misreading that? So it's giving an opening that isn't too daunting. And now, obviously, if you find out that the person is having suicidal thoughts or is severely depressed, then at that point it's important to reach out for more help for the person.
And always take that seriously, of course. Well, now, is there a difference in your mind between the way men handle it and women?
Well, I think women in general are more likely to cry, more likely to talk about things like, I was listening to this song on the radio and suddenly I started crying. I think men are often, not always, more reserved, think that they can deal with this themselves, and often that they might not really need help, that this is more likely to go away. And again, I think the issue is if this is a person who's had a depressive episode in the past or has a strong family history of depression. And I usually try to find those things out, even with friends or family, because it makes me more concerned. If it's someone who has a history of depression or who has a family history.
I'm wondering, when you talked about family history and how it plays out, I have a mother who happens to be bipolar and has dealt with depression all her life. And I'm wondering, though, they monitored myself and my brother very closely to see, and I think I'm relatively normal. Thankfully, I'm more stable. I don't have that. But can a depression, a clinical type depression, like what my mom suffers, manifest itself later in life? If, for instance, I haven't shown any symptoms of it now, could that hit me when I turn 60?
It could. It's less likely. But you could have a first episode later on. But again, over half of these illnesses have appeared by young adulthood. And then when it hits, does there have to be a triggering point? Obviously, we know why these parents are grieving in Chattanooga, and it's probably going to be with them for a long time. They have a very strong reason to be very depressed. Their loved one, their children have died. Now that's a trigger, right? We don't know if these parents are folks that had a history of depression or not, but they're feeling it right now, correct? And of course, some of those without a history are going to develop a full-blown depression, most likely, because the magnitude of the stressor is so large. It is overwhelming.
So it's very overwhelming. And again, every time I'm a chatterbox, as you probably can tell from this show, but is it not true? And you're right about men maybe sometimes being less likely to be forthcoming and want to talk about it. But if you can just get going, anytime I've ever had issues, and I'm just talking for me, I don't know about you at home, but after I talk about it with someone who's impartially kind of listening and just being nice, be it a friend or a counselor or something, you always, for me, feel better. And you don't expect that going in. And you may not even feel it while you're telling it. But then in your drive home, you're like, Oh, it just seems like something a little bit lifted off my shoulders.
Right.
It doesn't mean I'm over the depression, but I just feel better. Why is that?
Well, that's the connection. That's the sharing and being supported.
I didn't think I needed that.
But I think also there's this little idea that maybe you can get better, and then another idea that help might be available, that you have a person who could help you get help. I think always the idea that there's help out there somewhere is very reassuring.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Just kind of knowing that sometimes just in your own dark mind, when you're in this and you're alone, it builds up. And then when you can share with someone else who's maybe a little more rational at that moment because they're not going through what you're going through, it gives it context. And you can say, well, and then you all of a sudden realize, gosh, because in my mind it was so dark and awful, but you share it, and someone else gives you a different perspective that maybe makes more sense and maybe makes you feel better.
And I think one of the things that I try to do when it's not clear whether someone has a clinical depression is I go back to the old sleep, eat, and exercise on a regular schedule. Because when you begin to get the blues related to stress, no matter what time of the year it is, it's important to be sleeping on your regular schedule, to be eating on a regular schedule, and to continue exercising.
And not going excessive. Because some people, they get depressed and they'll eat a lot. Or obviously we talked about drinking. Some people get depressed and they'll sleep all day.
Yes.
Or they won't be able to fall asleep.
Right, it's exactly that. It can be too much or too little. I think the other thing that I'd be remiss in not mentioning is the fact that we're into the darkest days.
Oh, yeah.
So December 21st, which happens to be my birthday,
oh, really?
is the shortest day of the year.
Yeah.
And seasonal affective disorder affects about 500,000 people in our country. So for people who don't truly have seasonal affective disorder, though, trying to expose oneself to early morning light is very important.
Early morning light. All right. So now, of course, if you're getting up early and it's dark outside, and I've heard this, there are lights that you can get. Would you prescribe a fluorescent kind of light board? I've seen a friend of mine had one. It's a board, these lights, and in the morning they'll set it up, and if they're having their coffee, they turn it on, and it's bright and it's hitting them. It's not blinding them.
Right.
Does that work? Or what kind of light does it have? Could be these studio lights.
Well,
what kind of
not
lights?
actually. That's a special light with an intensity that's called 10,000 lux of light brightness. So it's a special light. This light you can find online. The one that I normally recommend is made by Northern Light Technologies. Really? And I have my patients spend about 20 minutes in the morning in front of that light, and there's a prescribed distance, and it's not really looking at that light directly. The light bounces up into the eyes. If I were reading, that would be adequate, and I'd need to be roughly 20, 24, 28 inches, depending on the type light that I have.
Okay.
But I think for other people, trying to get that first morning light, especially the sunlight early in the morning, when you go up, when it gets to be light, check out going out for 10 or 15 minutes, because this improves the evening sleep. To have light early in the morning helps set our circadian rhythm, our body's rhythm, and that can really be useful.
I'm going to look into that light. I think that's awesome.
That's why going to Florida can be very helpful in the dead of winter for people who are feeling a little bit down.
A beach and some shrimp is always helpful. Let's squeeze in another call real quickly before we have to wrap things up with Jewel. Jewel, good morning.
Top of the morning, Nick.
Hello.
How are y'all?
Good. How are you,
Good.
sir? You always seem pretty much in a good mood.
Well, I try to be. I try to find something to be glad about, every day.
Yeah.
Make me smile. I get up about maybe 4:35 and watch the sun come up in anticipation of is the day going to bring. And I keep a journal. You can buy these here books like for $1 or so. They look like a Pinto. They're black. They come in different colors. Composition books. And then the big round stick medium.
Yeah.
And I just get up in the morning with my coffee and my ink pen and hold hands with my muse for a little while. And I start out with the weather and what you talked about on your program and stuff like that, you know, and what day it is and how I'm feeling, or if I went and checked my mail or took the dog, however minute it is, I find it to be a good release and look back in retrospect. You see?
Hang tight there, Jewel. We only have 2 minutes, and I'll tell you what, Jewel is good for my mental space. I just love this guy, and I love his outlook on life. We just have a couple minutes left, and what he talks about, I'm glad he brought it up. Everyone these days is on their phone and texting, blah, blah, blah. And maybe if that works for you, that's great. But what about keeping a journal? Sometimes you don't have anyone to talk to. Maybe writing it down is nice.
Well, and I think journaling is a treatment intervention by many therapists. So he has chosen something that's very therapeutic.
It's working for him. Listen, in our remaining time, let's put up the number for Centerstone and how people can contact you. Talk about when you talk about appointments. Again, there's the number you call, and this is a number you could call. This is not a hotline for someone or something. Is it? The one at the bottom is, but the one at the top is for appointments. The one at the bottom is a crisis hotline.
Right.
And either one of those you can call depending on what you need.
Right, and of course the crisis line is a 24-hour number.
Okay.
In terms of appointments, if you call for an appointment and you really need the hotline or you need something immediately, obviously there's the capability of getting immediate help.
You over. But it is important, above all else there, the appointment you can set up, but you go to the hotline there if you're just dealing with a situation you don't think you can face. There's qualified professionals there to take your call, maybe talk you through it and work it through, and that's wonderful. Listen, thank you so much for coming on.
It was a pleasure.
I appreciate it, and I know we had a lot to talk about this morning beyond just the holidays, but maybe that helps some folks deal with all of this, and fantastic job over at Centerstone. You guys, it's a pleasure having you on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll take a break, be back with a programming note about tomorrow right after this. Stay with us.